My heart sank when I saw the letter. It was from the Office of Academic Affairs, and it had my name on it. I ripped it open, but I already knew what it was going to say. Dear Jon, yep, your academic progress during the last semester has been unsatisfactory. As you have been on academic probation for the last year and have failed to make progress toward a degree, we regret to inform you that you are no longer eligible to attend Indiana University Northwest. Should you wish to reapply for admission after a mandatory one-semester waiting period, you may do so. You'll be required to attend an academic reinstatement workshop prior to being readmitted to the university, and on and on and on. I dropped the letter on the table and sank down onto my chair. I had already felt like a failure, and now it was confirmed. I had been kicked out of college. I was 19 years old. 5 years after I was kicked out of Indiana University Northwest, I found myself teaching in an inner-city high school in Gary, Indiana. 9 years after I was kicked out of IUN, I found myself teaching in the math department at the same college that kicked me out. And in the last 25 years since then, I have received recognition and awards for university service and teaching. And as Mary shared, I won the Indiana University President's Award for Distinguished Teaching, which is given to one faculty member in the entire IU system per year. So the question is, how does somebody go from being a college flunk-out to becoming an award-winning teacher at a university that they were kicked out of? Or a broader question for all of us is, how can we take the big failure that we experience and turn it into bigger success? And for us in this room as educators, the question is, how do we, as teachers, help our young and inexperienced students to work through their own academic failures? I wasn't sure that anybody would be all that interested in my own personal academic rags to riches story, if you will, and so I really didn't talk too much about it. But in 2010, the vice chancellors of academic and student affairs approached me about heading up a new office that they were creating, a new position, the Office of Retention Initiatives. And of course, the name of it implies what it is. The job of this office was to determine why students were failing to persist, and then figure out how we can keep them, something that we're all passionate about doing. Fortunately, these academic administrators did not know at the time they offered me the position my own academic backstory. They might have been given pause if they had. But I was so excited. Imagine that you've experienced the worst academic failure you can ever experience, and suddenly you're given a chance to help those same students who are experiencing the same academic failures that you experienced. I was ecstatic. I was on cloud nine, and I had a stack of appeals letters on my office, on my desk, about this high. They were appeal letters from students who had been kicked out of college and wanted a second chance. I dove in and I was eager to help those students. Somebody had given me a second chance at one time, and I wanted to give other students a second chance. But as I read those appeal letters, I started to notice something a little disturbing. All of these students were sharing with me the reasons that they were kicked out, the things that happened that caused them to get kicked out. They were asking me for a second chance, but they weren't offering any ideas of what was going to be different the second time around. Now, we all know the definition of insanity. It's been attributed to a number of different people. Albert Einstein is probably the one that gets credited with it the most. But we all know that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that's what these students were offering me. They were offering me that definition of insanity. They were saying, I'm going to come back to college, and this time it's going to be different. But they weren't telling me what they were going to change in order to be successful this time around. It was at that point that I started thinking, okay, how can I help these students? Maybe it's time to share my own personal story. And so, with the encouragement of my wife and friends, I began working on a book, which was just published this year. It's called The Flunk-Out Professor: 6 Steps for Turning Your Big Failure into Bigger Success. And once I got that book out there and started sharing it with students, people started thinking differently about what they needed to do in order to succeed. One of the courses at IU Northwest this fall is actually using this in their freshman seminar class as a textbook, if you will. I'm quite honored that they're doing that. But anyway, the problem is that our students have a faulty image of what success looks like. This is the example that all of our students seem to think is the key to success. If you want to succeed, you have to run from failure. You have to go the opposite direction. Failure is not an option. Success is the only way to go. They're diametrically opposed. As a math teacher, I think of it as opposite ends of the number line. That's what our students think. I think we all know that this is erroneous. This is a fallacy that we've got to change in our students' minds, because here's the reality. This is what success looks like. If you want to succeed, you have to be willing to go through the failure. The person that's fundamentally responsible for the writing of this book is my wife, Kate. By the way, my name is John, and my wife's name is Kate. Anybody want to guess how many kids we have? Yes, we do. We are the happily married John and Kate plus 8. That's what we like to say. And if you don't believe me, you can check out my website. There are pictures of my wife and I with our 8 wonderful kids. But anyway, I discovered, for those of you who don't know, by the way, that was an old reality show that has been off the air for a few years. We used to get the most incredible teasing when that show was on the air, but they were so dysfunctional. We're not at all like that. Our life would not be a good reality show. Anyway, so I discovered, when I looked back at my own academic story, I discovered 6 steps that I had taken without realizing it that led me to success out of the academic failure I had experienced. The first step that we have to take when we fail is we have to face our circumstances. We have to recognize where we are in the moment. So when I got kicked out of college, my wife and we were high school sweethearts. We had met when she was 14 and I was 15, and after about 5 years we were dating. And she came to me and she said, you know what? She said, you've been kicked out of college, you're delivering pizzas at night and playing video games at the video arcade all day. This is not the kind of lifestyle that I'm looking for in a future husband. I don't understand why, but anyway, she said, you need to do something with your life because I don't want to marry a bum. And that's what she said, those exact words. She gets embarrassed when I tell this story now, but the reality is she said, I don't want to marry a bum. She was right. I was being a bum. I had no direction. I had no plan for my life. We all have students who come into our classrooms. They come into our orbits for a little while, and they might circle around, and then they disappear because they have no plan. They're drifting aimlessly. That's what I was doing. And then my girlfriend, who I cared very much about, and we were talking about marriage, made me face my circumstances. She said, I don't care what you do, but you have to do something. I'm not going to marry a bum. Now, one of my favorite stories of somebody who faced their circumstances and achieved great success is this guy. You're probably familiar with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. He's one of Hollywood's biggest action stars. And you also might be aware that he achieved his initial success as a professional wrestler in the World Wrestling Entertainment organization. But what you may not realize is that his success as a Hollywood actor did not come simply from being a successful wrestler. It actually came from his failure as a football player. A lot of people don't realize that. Dwayne Johnson played college football at the University of Miami, which, by the way, is a breeding ground for NFL players. But his senior year, he got injured. And while his teammates and friends were being drafted into the NFL, he didn't get drafted. He didn't even get offered a free agent opportunity. So he went to the Canadian Football League, where he signed a contract, a practice squad contract, for $250 a week. And that lasted for just a few weeks before he was cut. On his way back home to America from Canada, he was sitting in the front seat of his dad's car. He reached into his wallet, he opened it up, and he had $7 in his wallet. He said it was the lowest moment of his life. He calls that now, even in his own motivational speaking, he calls this his $7 moment. It was in that moment when Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson determined that he was not going to allow $7 to define his life. He went back to his parents' apartment. He decided to follow in his father's footsteps as a professional wrestler, and he began training voraciously. He trained every day. He would travel for hours to train with top wrestling coaches. And he eventually caught the eye of Vince McMahon, who is the owner of World Wrestling Entertainment. McMahon liked what he saw. He brought him into the organization. And long story short, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson became one of the top draws in wrestling. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's success came only by experiencing the deep failure of a failed professional football career. He faced his circumstances and came out the other side. When I was kicked out of college, I didn't want to face my circumstances. I just wanted to ignore things. I felt bad. I felt sorry for myself. I felt humiliated. And so I just ignored everything that was going on. Until my girlfriend said, "I don't want to marry a bum." At that point, I had a choice. It was time for me to accept responsibility. Now, I want you to understand that there is a difference between facing your circumstances and accepting responsibility. It's a fine line, but our students will face their circumstances and then they'll do what I did. It is so easy to blame everybody else. It's not my fault. When I was in college and I got kicked out, I failed classes, it wasn't my fault. It was the fault of the train that stopped me from getting to school on time. So I didn't want to walk into my class late because that would be rude and disrespectful to the professor, so I didn't go to class. It was the fault of the other students who took up all the parking spaces in the parking lot, so I couldn't find a place to park. So I got to class late, and I didn't want to walk into the class and interrupt the class because that would be rude, so I didn't go to class. I mean, I was being kind. I was being respectful of my professors by not walking in late, right? It was the fault of the gremlin that shut off my alarm in the middle of the night so that I overslept, so that I got to school late, so that I didn't want to walk into class late because that would be rude. And it was also the fault of that professor who would dare to put questions on a test that were in the reading that he assigned, but he didn't talk about in class. How dare he? It was everybody else's fault but mine. The reality is that we don't like accepting blame. We don't like taking responsibility. But it is a key step in the process of going from failure to success. So how do we encourage our students to accept responsibility? That's the question that I have for you this morning. And as I was preparing to come and speak to you, I had something occur with me 3 weeks ago that could not illustrate this example of our students not wanting to accept responsibility. And I'm going to share it with you right now. 3 weeks ago, actually 20 days ago, I finished a summer class at IU Northwest. I had a student in the class who was an athlete who didn't do most of her homework, didn't even show up for the final exam. The final exam was on Friday, and Friday night, I received the following email from her. I'm going to read to you the email exchange between her and myself. So Friday night at 9 o'clock, I got the following email. "Hi, is there any way I can come in tomorrow to do the final?" When did I get that email? Friday night. She was asking me to come in on Saturday morning to give her the final exam. So I simply replied, "No, there isn't. I'm sorry." The next morning at 6 a.m. Am I not able to take it at all? I replied, the exam was yesterday at 11. You weren't there to take it. There is no makeup. A couple hours later, is there any way I can take it? I really need to. I was stuck downtown, Chicago. I was stuck downtown dropping my mom off at the airport, and I can show you the tickets. I didn't have access to a computer to email you. Can I please make it up? By the way, this is the same student who had sent me messages on her cell phone throughout the semester, but she suddenly didn't have a computer to email me. I wrote, I'm sorry, but you needed to contact me before the exam to do this. Your grade prior to the final exam was not high enough to warrant an incomplete. I was trying to get her to accept responsibility for her situation. 15 minutes later, so there's no way I can pass the class? To which I'm thinking, well, this is a math class, and if you can't calculate what your grade is, maybe you shouldn't be in the class anyway. You know, that was my thinking, but anyway. So she says, there's no way I can pass the class? I replied, I said, that is correct. A 0 on the final, coupled with your poor homework results, mean that you did not pass the class. I'm sorry. 5 minutes later, I really need this. Is there nothing else I can do? About 2 minutes later, I wrote a reply. I then deleted it, took about half an hour, and went back and wrote the following reply. So she said, is there nothing else I can do? I said, no, there is not. And then I addressed her by her name. I said, I'll say Joan. Joan, I have tried to be kind. Now I will be direct. You did not even attempt more than 20 of the homework assignments. You received a D on the midterm. Even if I allowed you to take the final exam late, which I'm not going to do, and you got a perfect score on it, you would still only have a 57% because of all the missed homework assignments. 57% is an F. I then said, you did not take this course seriously and you did not communicate with me at all until after the final exam. The unfortunate result is that you have failed the course. I recommend that you take it again in the fall. I am sorry to be so blunt, but it seems to be the only way for you to understand the situation clearly. Now remember, I had just said in that email, even if I allowed you to take the final exam, you got a perfect score, all the missed homework assignments. So her reply was, I can get the assignments done today. Of course, this was Saturday afternoon by this point, and I simply replied, the last day of the class was yesterday. The course is now over. I was trying to get that student to accept responsibility. She was placing blame everywhere else. She was placing blame on the fact that she had to take her mom to the airport. She was placing blame other places. She wasn't accepting responsibility. Have any of you ever had a student like this? Tells me they got a D on the test and don't know why, but they're never in class and playing games on their iPhone when they are. Anybody ever experienced students like that? Yes. We've got to teach our students how to accept responsibility for their situation. That's something that I wasn't doing when I got kicked out of college. I was blaming everybody else. So accepting responsibility looks very much like what I call self-leadership, leading ourselves. You cannot effectively lead other people or other teams if you are not leading yourself well first. Leadership author Bill George was asked what his hardest leadership challenge was. And he said, the hardest person you will ever have to lead is yourself. So what did self-leadership look like for me when I finally accepted responsibility for the fact that I'd been kicked out of college? Well, it involves some very strikingly strange things that I think you're really going to be shocked at. It involved going to class. It involved doing my homework. It involved getting into a study group with other students. It involved going and talking to the professors to get help when I didn't understand it. In other words, self-leadership for our students is all about simply doing the little things. Of course, we think they're little, they think they're monumental, but doing the little things that will make them succeed. So how do we encourage our students to accept responsibility? The only thing that we can do is we can share our own story or the stories of other people that we have had experiences with, and then let them experience the consequences if they don't want to listen to our wisdom. Every person in here has been a college student, I believe, from what I understand. So every one of us has been in this situation. I'm willing to bet every single person in this classroom has wanted to not go to class one day. I'm willing to bet the majority of you have all ditched at least one class in your career. I can't count the number of times that I ditched them. We need to remember what our students are feeling. We need to help them understand that we were where they are. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in my second presentation. But we need to remember what our students are feeling in order to help them believe that we have wisdom that can benefit them. I love this quote by Hal Elrod. If you've never heard of Hal Elrod, I would encourage you to Google him and look up his story. It's an incredible story. He actually was legally dead 3 different times in his life. One time he was basically dead for 6 minutes in a car accident, and he was revived. He just recently overcame cancer. He's now a motivational speaker and has written a book, and it's just phenomenal. But I just love this quote. The moment you accept responsibility for everything in your life is the moment you gain the power to change anything in your life. I love that quote. Once we accept responsibility for it all, then we can change whatever we don't like. Of course, when I was 20 and I was starting to go through the process of getting back into college, I didn't know what steps I was taking. I discovered these steps after I went back and examined my own journey. You all have steps that you've taken to get where you are, and I would encourage you to examine those steps along the way. The third step that I discovered is that we have to be able to cast a vision for our future. Now, when I went to college the first time, I didn't really have any clue what I was doing. But I knew one thing. I knew that doctors made a lot of money. So I walked into IU Northwest, went into an academic advisor's office, and I said, I want to major in pre-med. Didn't matter that I'd gotten D's in high school biology and C's in chemistry. I wasn't thinking about that. I went in and declared a major in pre-med. That was my first major. Now here's the thing. Looking back, I could never really imagine myself being a doctor. I couldn't see myself wearing the white lab coat. I couldn't see myself consulting with other doctors on diagnoses or prescribing drugs for patients. I couldn't even imagine myself meeting with patients. I could not see that as a possible future. But being 18 when I went to college, knowing that I wanted to make a lot of money, I just said, I'm going to be a doctor. But when I went back to college the second time, I had made a decision to become a teacher. And when I made that decision to become a teacher, I could see it clearly. I could imagine myself standing in front of a chalkboard with chalk dust all over my hands while I wrote out the quadratic formula. I could imagine myself helping students with their homework. I could imagine students coming and talking to me about problems they might be having in their life, talking to me as a confidant. I could even see myself sponsoring field trips or sponsoring clubs for these high school students. I could see it. I was able to clearly see what I wanted to do. Casting vision is about bringing our future into focus. I couldn't clearly see being a doctor, but once I saw what being a teacher was going to be like, it was crystal clear to me, and I had no doubt. Now, we often have students who come into our classes or enroll in our university, and they come in with this misconception that on day one they have to declare a major, and they have to know what they want to do with the rest of their life at the age of 18. And they'll come into my office and they will be freaked out because they're afraid of making a mistake. Can I tell you something about these students? These are my favorite students. Because when a student walks into my office and they're feeling the stress of, I don't know what I'm going to major in. I don't know what I want to do with my life. I'm only here because I need to do something. And my mom and dad wanted me to go to college. I love talking to these students because they're at such a high stress level, and I know that I've got some information that I can share with them that is going to cause the stress to just flow out of their faces. What I tell them is, hey, let's put the whole idea of a major aside for just a minute. Let me ask you some questions. And I ask them some questions, and all I do is listen. I let them talk. I ask them questions like, where'd you go to high school? Crown Point High School, that's where I went. Crown Point High School, okay, what did you like at Crown Point High School? What were some of the classes you liked? Who were some of the professors or teachers that you liked? What were some of the extracurricular activities that you enjoyed? And then start to talk. They'd kind of reminisce. You could see the stress go out of their face because they were reflecting back on a time, not in the distant past, but just a few months ago, when they felt safe. They felt comfortable in high school. They were, especially as seniors, they're at the top of the food pyramid. When they're seniors, they feel very comfortable. And now they're thrust into college and they feel like they've got to make all these life decisions. And they get scared. But when they start talking about their high school experience, the stress starts to leave them. And then when they start talking about what they liked and who their teachers were that they liked and things like that, you see the smile start to come to their face. And as you listen, you will pick up information that you are going to be able to use to help them understand that, hey, you may not know what you want to do with your life right now, but that's okay. So for example, I had a student in my class one day and I said, what was your favorite extracurricular activity? And they said, well, I was in plays when I was in high school. I was in the play my senior year. And I thought, really, did you enjoy that? Oh, I love that. I love being up on stage, and I love the camaraderie in the theater department. And they just talk about how much they enjoyed it. And I said, well, you know what? We have theater courses here at IU Northwest. How about if we put you into a theater class your freshman year? They come in thinking they're going to have to take math and science and English and history, courses that they might not have necessarily liked. But when you present them with an option like, hey, you want to take a theater class? They're like, yeah, that sounds interesting. But then they'll say, but I don't know if I want to major in theater. And that's when I get them. That's when I hook them, because I tell them, you know what? You don't have to major in theater. You can still take a theater class. I introduce them to the concept of general education requirements and electives. If a student comes in and they feel like they have to declare a major in pre-med, the last thing they're thinking about is taking a theater class. They don't understand that a theater course could slide very nicely into their degree. And then I tell them, and you know what? If you like theater, you could take another class there. If you don't, we have achieved success, because if a student takes a class and they find they don't like it, why is that a success? Because now they know something they don't want to do, right? Actually, I'll show you this later. I got a D in freshman biology in college, okay, when I was majoring in pre-med, which I'll talk to you about later. But here's the thing. I never had to take another biology course, and even though I got a D in that biology course, and it's on my transcript, which I will also show you later, just to prove that I really am as big a failure as I say I am. Even though I got a D in freshman biology, guess what? That freshman biology course satisfied the science requirement that I had to have for my degree in education. Now, I apologize to any of the biology professors in the classroom. I'm not minimizing that by any stretch of the imagination. I just wasn't very good at biology. So I ask questions and I listen to my students and I gradually de-stress them. And I help them build a schedule. It's going to have some of the requirements they might not like. They're going to have to take a math class eventually. They're going to have to take a composition class eventually. But I try and build some things into their schedule that they will enjoy so that it's a positive first semester experience. Now, this third step of casting a vision is sometimes difficult for students who are coming to college for the first time late in their career, or for students like me who had flunked out and are now trying to come back. Because casting a vision, they might have tried that before. They might have tried to cast a vision for their future like I did when I thought I'd be a doctor, and I failed miserably. And they don't want to fail again. But I love working with returning students. I love working with students who are non-traditional, want to do something. Maybe they've been in the workforce for 20 years and now they're coming back to college and they're working towards something new. I love working with them. They're so motivated. They work so hard. Some of my best experiences are with this group of students. The fourth step that I discovered in my process from failure to success, I had to take action. I had to do something. Now, the first three steps, facing your circumstances, accepting responsibility, and casting a vision, those three steps are critical, but those are mental or even emotional or maybe even spiritual steps that you have to take within yourself. There comes a point where you have to take a physical, tangible step towards success. Now, for me, that first step was actually pretty easy. I had to get reinstated. Now, the great thing about reinstatement is that we want to keep our students, and if a student fails out, we want to give them a chance to come back. So getting reinstated to a university is not typically all that difficult if they were accepted the first time, unless maybe it's an Ivy League school or something like that. But getting reinstated was simple. I had to go through a reinstatement workshop, which I later got to teach, by the way, as a faculty member. Absolutely love that, because I got to show those students coming back my own failure story. But the second thing that I had to do, the second piece of action that I had to take that was a little more daunting, I had to fix my GPA. When I came back to IU Northwest, I had a 1.44 GPA. Yeah, ouch, I heard that, yes. That was my response too. And of course, when I came back to IUN, I had decided that I wanted to go into education. I wanted to become a teacher. So the minimum requirement for the education program was a 2.5. I had an entire letter grade that I had to improve. But the great thing about college is that, and I don't know what you might call it here at Manchester, at IU Northwest, we have this program called FXing, where essentially you can retake the courses that you've failed, the damage of the F is removed, and the benefit of the new grade is put into it. We call it FXing. And there were 2 courses that I had failed, one of which is a calculus class that I now teach. I'll tell that story a little later too. And the other was, interestingly enough, a theater class. I retook those 2 classes that I failed and had F's in, and I got an A and a B+. And my GPA went from a 1.44 to a 2.33 in 1 semester. That effectively took me off of academic probation. I was above 2.0, so I was off academic probation. Unfortunately, I was not quite high enough to get into the education program, but I was off academic probation. And the best part is that my girlfriend saw that I was serious about getting my act together. When I got back into college, and even as I was going through that first semester, she might have had some doubts, but when I showed her my transcript with the A and the B+ and the 2 classes I'd failed, she believed that I was finally getting it together. So, when we want to encourage our students to take action, we need to tell them that they need to do it like they mean it. They have to attack whatever it is that they're going to do. Whatever action step that they need to take, they need to go after it, and they need to go after it hard. Sometimes we need to help them understand what those action steps are. One of the things I hate to do, but I often have to do, and I'm sure that many of you, if not all of you, have had to do in your classes, is sit down with a student and tell them, you need to withdraw from my class. There comes a point where a student cannot pass your class no matter what they do the rest of the way. And we might have to be the one to tell them, you might need to consider withdrawing from this class. It's not a fun conversation, but sometimes it's an action step that we need to tell our students to do. But whatever it is that they decide to do, they need to go after it tenaciously, which is what I did when I went back to college. Like I said earlier, I started becoming that serious student that I should have been all along. I started visiting my professors. I started talking to them. I started getting in to study sessions. And guess what? I started to see some success. And success can be very addicting. When you start experiencing academic success, it feels good. You get that dopamine rush, and you want it more. And you know that the only way that you're going to get that dopamine rush that way is to go back and talk to your professor again and get some more help. The 5th step that I discovered when I look back at my academic rags to riches career was that we have to make course corrections along the way. Now let me give you an example. When we set a goal and we set out and we see that goal way down at the end of the road and we start walking toward it, it's possible that things are going to be pulling at us and tugging at us from the side, distracting us from where we're trying to go. And we have to make course corrections. So for example, I'm looking at the gentleman in the far corner of the room right by the window. Yep, just raised his hand. If I wanted to walk over and talk to him, straightest direction is right here. I'm just going to climb up and walk over these tables? No, of course not. I'm going to go that way. I'm not going toward him, I'm going a different direction. But eventually I'm going to get to the stairs, I'm going to start heading toward him. But what if, as I'm starting to walk up the stairs, somebody stops me and they want to talk to me? What you said earlier, I kind of like that. Can we talk about that? And I'm like, great, sure. And as I talk to that person, I'm distracted from where I was going. That continues to happen. We need to be able to make course corrections along the way. Now, how many of you are familiar with the movie Apollo 13? Most of you. If you're not familiar with it, I'll give you the IMDb real quick version. Back in the early 1970s, these three astronauts, well, these are actors, but the astronauts they were portraying. Tom Hanks was not on Apollo 13 spacecraft. But these three astronauts were going to the moon. They were going to land on the moon, and they were going to do exploration, and they were going to do scientific tests, and then they were going to come back. But on the way to the moon, there was an explosion on board their spacecraft, and their mission suddenly changed from getting to the moon to getting home safely. It's one of the greatest rescue stories in history, and I get chills whenever I talk about it because it's one of my favorite movies, and even though I've watched it 100 times, I still am on the edge of my seat every time I watch this movie. There comes a point in the movie, if you've seen it, where they have to fire the engines to correct their trajectory because as they're approaching Earth, they're drifting a little bit off of their course. And they need to come into the Earth's atmosphere at the right angle. If they come in too steeply, they will incinerate and they'll be killed in a horrible fireball. But if they come in too shallow, they will skip off the Earth's atmosphere much like a stone skipping across a pond, and they will drift into outer space, where they will die a slow, cold death. So they have to burn the engines. The problem is that when the engines are burned, they're normally burned by the computer on board the ship. But the explosion damaged the computer, and they had very little power. And the power that they had in reserve, much of the movie is dedicated to figuring out how to turn on all of the systems so that they have the power they need to come back into the Earth's atmosphere. So they had to burn the engines by hand. It's like 30 seconds of the most tense Hollywood drama I've ever seen. And you hear Mission Control in Houston counting backwards from 30 in the background while these astronauts are struggling to keep the Earth in the window while they fire these engines in order to correct their trajectory. They had to make a course correction. And in their case, it was a matter of life and death. Now, the course corrections that our students might need to make are not necessarily a matter of life and death. But they're still important course corrections. So for myself, when I was a freshman at IU Northwest in my biology class, and I was failing biology 2 weeks into the semester, a course correction that I could have made at that moment was I could have withdrawn from the class immediately. I could have gotten back some of my tuition dollars, and I could have focused my, my energies on the other three courses that I still had. Or, it was only 2 weeks into the semester, I could have possibly gotten enrolled late into another class that might have interested me and maybe even sent me on a different trajectory for my college career. Instead, I managed to somehow pull a D out of that class, pull my grade up from an F to a D, and then the next semester I enrolled in another biology class. I was chasing failure hard. We need to help our students because they don't know what they don't know about making course corrections. If you're their academic advisor, faculty, or student success advisor, you might need to ask them, is there a class you need to withdraw from? How are your grades in those courses? Because when students withdraw from classes, ideally what they should do is they should then channel all of the energy from that course into their other courses so they can do well. Actually, I encourage my students, if they have to withdraw from a class, I tell them, look, you're going to have to retake my class anyway because it's usually the required course for the liberal arts degree that they're seeking. And I tell them, you're welcome to keep attending. You're welcome to keep taking exams. You're welcome to ask questions in class. You're welcome to participate in study groups. But if you withdraw, then you won't risk the F that you're probably going to get if you stay in the class. So we might need to ask them if they need to withdraw from a class. Maybe their course load is too heavy right off the bat. At IU Northwest, our limit before they have to get permission is 17 credit hours. We do have some courses that are 5 credit hour courses, and so if they take 4 3s and a 5, that's 17. If they want to go above that, they need to get special permission. But I will often ask students if their course load might be too heavy. And of course, you run into issues with, well, I have to be full-time and financial aid. There are things like that, but these are questions we can ask. We won't know the answers for them unless we ask the questions. Here's a big one. I don't know if you have this as big here at Manchester or not, since you are a residential campus, but at a commuter campus like IU Northwest, this is huge. Everybody in here knows that you cannot effectively be a full-time student and have a full-time job at the same time. Even if you manage to pull them both off, the rest of your life is going to be falling apart. So I will often ask my students, you know, are you working? Some of my students, the question would be, do you have kids? What are the things? And I certainly wouldn't tell them to prioritize college over their kids, but I ask the questions in order to help them make course corrections. And then I really try and dig in and find out what hard choices it is that they're avoiding. So making course corrections is really, really critical. The last step that I discovered is that we have to celebrate milestones. Now, I'm going to deviate slightly from my academic story for just a few minutes to share something of a bit more personal nature so you can kind of understand who I am. And then I will bring that back to my academic journey. But at one point in my life, I weighed more than 350 pounds. Everybody in here, probably over the age of 30, has been weighed on a scale like this. Before they went digital, you went to the doctor years ago and they weighed you on a scale like this. And that bottom bar right there goes up to 300. And the top one goes up to 50. So this scale will weigh you at a maximum of 350 pounds. In one of the most humiliating moments in my life, I went in for a checkup and I stepped on the scale. And the nurse slid the bottom bar over to 300 and she slid the top bar over to 50 and the scale didn't move. I was humiliated. And she just said, well, I guess I'll just write 350 plus. The reality is I don't know what my heaviest weight was. The number that I have assigned to myself as being my heaviest weight was 360 pounds. So whenever I talk about my weight loss journey, I think of the number 360 as where I started. Could have been a little higher than that, but I'm pretty confident it was at least that. At about that time, my wife and I had our last child, beautiful little baby girl, red hair, blue eyes. Her name was Rachel. And as I held her, I got very, very choked up because I thought to myself, I am never going to see this girl grow up. I am never going to get to walk this girl down the aisle. I'm never going to see any grandchildren that she might provide for me because I'm probably going to die of a heart attack or a stroke. So I decided I had to do something about it. I went to all the weight loss charts and tables and documents online, and I started looking up information. And I discovered at that time that a guy of my height, 6'3", with a large bone structure, should weigh about 225 pounds. And being the math guy that I was, and still am, I did the math and thought 360 minus 225, that's 135 pounds. I can't lose 135 pounds. There's no way. And I just lost it. I was just devastated. But I collected my thoughts. I said, okay, don't think about the 135. Let's set some intermediate goals. So what if you get down to 300? Just get under 300 pounds. I set that as my first goal. The day I stepped on the scale, and it was under 300 pounds, we celebrated at my house. We did not celebrate with cake and ice cream. I can promise you that. But we did celebrate. We celebrated with my kids telling me how proud they were, and with my wife giving me a hug and telling me, way to go, honey. And I was like, wow, I'm under 300 pounds. I haven't been under 300 pounds in 10 years. And I was excited. We celebrated that goal, that milestone. Then I said, okay, what do I want to get to next? I'm still 75 pounds away from my goal. What do I want to get to next? I thought, I want to get to 280. The reason 280 was significant to me is because that's what I weighed when I graduated from high school. That was the weight on my driver's license. Even when I ballooned to 360 pounds, I never changed the number. So it still said 280. I want to get down to what I weighed in high school. Guess how I celebrated that? 2 weeks after I hit 280, that was my 30th high school reunion. And these two guys, friends of mine from high school, didn't even recognize me because they had seen me at my 20th and my 25th reunions when I was over 350 pounds. And they were shocked. I celebrated 280 by going to my high school reunion and seeing people that I hadn't seen in years. And I was at 280 pounds, my old high school weight. My next goal was 260 pounds. Now, does anybody know why 260 might feel significant? 100 pounds, that's right. Where did I start? I started at 360 in my mind. So 260 was my goal next, because then I'd be a big loser. In my mind, I was thinking Big Loser. By the way, ironically, and this is true, I used to watch The Biggest Loser. If you remember that show, I used to watch it while eating junk food. And I admired the people on there who were working so hard and losing weight, but I just figured that could never be me. So anyway, I got down, by the way, under 260 in June, a couple months ago. So my next goal is 250 pounds. And the way that I want to celebrate that is by going skydiving. There's a place over in Ottawa, Illinois called Skydive Chicago. I have already contacted them and reserved October 5th as the date by which I want to go skydiving, and they have a hard weight limit of 250 pounds. That was my weight last week. I'm under 250, thank you. And not only am I going skydiving on October 5th, but 5 of my 6 adult kids are going with me. I am so excited. My wife doesn't want to go, but most of my kids are going to go, and we're going to jump out of a perfectly good airplane together. Anyway, now, my final goal is 225 pounds. But notice there's quotation marks around final. Why might I put quotation marks around final? What happens when we start getting close to our goals? What? We make new ones. We start looking past them, don't we? So I might get down to around 228, 230, and I might say, you know what? Maybe 210 is a better goal. And I start finding new things, new shiny things that are past my original goal. But you better believe that I'm going to celebrate when I hit 225. We have to celebrate our milestones as we hit them. We have to. Even if we set new milestones, new goals that we want to achieve, we have to celebrate the ones as we achieve them. I loved it earlier. I can't remember who was talking about it, but somebody was talking about setting goals and setting a big goal for, weren't you talking about setting a big goal for the university? I love that. I thought, that's perfect. That fits right into my slide. Have you ever heard this expression, BHAG? Anybody ever heard that? A BHAG is a big, hairy, audacious goal. It is a goal that is so big that it almost feels impossible to hit. That's what a BHAG is. We all need to be setting BHAGs. We all need to be setting big goals and going after them. More importantly, as educators, we need to be helping our students to set big goals and go after them. So returning to my educational experience, my educational journey a little bit, what were some of the milestones that we celebrated along the way? Well, when I got reinstated to the university, we celebrated. We were excited. Wow, I'm back. When I got off of academic probation, we celebrated that. I was not going to be able to graduate if I was still on academic probation and had to get my GPA up over 2.0. When that happened, we celebrated. When I got admitted to the education program, that was cause for celebration. These were milestones in my academic career that we took time to celebrate. If I had gone back to college with a 1.4 GPA and say, I want to be a school teacher one day, and that's all I focused on, that would have been such a huge mountain to climb. I don't know if I would have been able to persist. But I focused on the milestones along the way. I graduated from college, huge celebration. When I got my first teaching position, it was in Gary, Indiana. I was living in Lake County, Indiana at the time, did not have to move. I was offered a job actually at Tell City, Indiana, which is all the way down at the southern tip of Indiana, right across the border from Kentucky. And I didn't want to move out of Lake County, and then the Gary, Indiana position came along. I was thrilled. We celebrated that position. Eventually, I had to get a master's degree because at that time, high school teachers were still required to get them. And we celebrated that. And eventually, I got hired at IU Northwest, and there was much rejoicing. What are the milestones that we as educators need to help our students understand? They don't even know what some of these milestones are, or they don't think they're even worth celebrating. We need to change their focus and change their mind on that. For example, right off the bat, getting admitted to the university is a huge deal. Very brief personal story. My oldest daughter is a very successful accountant now. She applied to go to IU Bloomington. She didn't want to go to IU Northwest where Dad taught. She wanted to go to IU Bloomington. My daughter was an excellent student, but the problem was she could not take standardized tests. She was terrible at it. She took the SAT twice, and her scores were abysmal. Even though she's a brilliant, brilliant young woman, she was declined admission to IU Bloomington twice. She was really ticked off because her older brother had gotten into IU and he was not nearly as smart as she was. But anyway, she ended up going to IU Northwest, fell in love with it, graduated with honors, and when it came time for graduation, she was selected out of her class of 800 to deliver the commencement address. Very accomplished young woman. But when she did not get admitted to IU, she was devastated. Getting admitted to a university is not a foregone conclusion. We all know that. Our students need to understand this is cause for celebration. This is a big milestone. Just passing their first exam, now hopefully passing with an A or a B, obviously, but achieving some academic success in their class. They might not think about that, but we need to help them remember, good job. You're not in college or in high school anymore. This is a big deal. This is a lot bigger than high school. You need to celebrate that. If they are part of a university club or team, that's a big deal. And we, as their academic advisors and their faculty members, we need to be celebrating that with them. Remember how you felt when you were students and that advisor or that professor that you looked up to was so encouraging to you and so happy for you for the things you were accomplishing. And then remember that you're in that position to your students. And we need to help them remember that. This is a big one. Students don't think about it, especially at a residential campus. I'm sure this is big. These students that are coming out of high school, many of them have friends that they've had since kindergarten, possibly, staying in the same school district. And then they go all the way through their early schooling career, get up to senior in high school. They've got all these friends they've had for their whole life. And then suddenly their friends are going elsewhere and they're going elsewhere and they come to a campus that they don't have any friends. Connecting with other students and making friends is a big deal, especially on a residential campus. We need to encourage our students to do that and celebrate when they experience those new friendships. Selecting a major, this is huge. If a student comes in and they don't know what their major is, when they finally select it, that's great. And then when they later deselect it, we can celebrate that too. That's what I did. I was a pre-med major, and let me tell you, I celebrated when I realized I have no business being a doctor. I was excited that I wasn't going to major in biology. Selecting a major is a big deal, even if they do it 2 or 3 times. We need to celebrate that with them. Of course, this is a no-brainer. Anytime a student receives a scholarship, there's cause for celebration. But I'll tell you what, if you find out that your student has received a scholarship and you congratulate them without them coming and telling you about it, that is going to mean the world to your students. Because that means that you're invested in what's going on in their life. And you knew about the rewards that they were experiencing. So, does anybody have any other things that you might suggest that students could that we could celebrate with our students? Any other milestones in college?
Getting an internship.
Yes, getting an internship. That's a great one.
Athletic achievement.
Yep, athletic achievement. Maybe you bring in the newspaper clipping from the football game the weekend before and you hand it to them and say, hey, good job, I saw what you did over the weekend. Yes? Reading a long novel. You know, it's amazing you say that. When I was in high school, I wanted to read this little short dinky novel, and my American Lit teacher made me read The Caine Mutiny instead. If anybody knows The Caine Mutiny, it's about that thick, and I thought, oh my gosh, why is she making me do this? One of the best books I ever read. That's a great one. Yeah?
And those students are very appreciative when we show up at their athletic competitions.
Absolutely. When we show up. What's that? And musical performances, yes. Absolutely. And theater shows. My son was a theater major for a little while. He ended up changing it, but I know that when I went to see his performance, there were several students in the cast who were in my classes, and they were delighted to see me. Yes? Yes, a public presentation of their academic work, or offering to work with them on some of their own research that they're trying to develop. At IU Northwest, we have a student, College of Arts and Sciences student research conference every spring, and they're working together with their professors on it. These things mean a great deal to our students, and we need to be celebrating them along with our students because that will elevate their ability. So as I bring this first session to a close, we're going to take a little 10-minute break here in just a moment. But I want to remind you that when our students get stuck in their failures, sometimes they feel like, this is my life. I'm stuck here. I'm a failure. And what we have to remember and what we have to tell our students is, hey, wait a minute. Your life is not a snapshot. It's not a photograph fixed in time. If it were, I would be a lot younger than I am now. We need to tell them, our lives are not fixed moments. Our lives are like a movie, and there are going to be ups and there are going to be downs. But the choices that they make along the way are what is going to eventually write the final chapter of their own book. So let's go ahead and take a short break, and we'll come back together in about 10 minutes. Thank you.